I did not cry. I did not argue. I simply turned around, walked back to my car, and sat in the driver's seat for a long moment, looking at my own hands on the steering wheel. That was the night of my son's 50th birthday party. The party I had paid for. The party I had planned. The party where my daughter-in-law met me at the front door of the venue I was renting and told me, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, that the evening had become a private family affair, and that perhaps it would be best if I headed home. I said, "Of course, Renee, you enjoy the evening." Then I drove home, poured myself 2 fingers of bourbon, and called my attorney. My name is Walter Gaines. I am 67 years old. I spent 31 years building a commercial real estate company in Charlotte, North Carolina, from a single leased office and a second-hand desk into a firm that managed properties across 4 states. I did it without a trust fund, without family connections, without anything except a willingness to work when other men were sleeping. My late wife, Diane, kept the books in the early years, sitting at our kitchen table after the kids were in bed. She passed 4 years ago from ovarian cancer, and I have not had a single day since then that did not begin with the particular silence of a house where someone used to be. My son Garrett is the older of my 2 children. My daughter Melissa lives in Portland with her husband and 3 boys, and she calls me every Sunday without fail. Garrett lives 12 minutes from me in a house I helped him buy when he and Renee married 18 years ago. I contributed the down payment. I told him at the time that it was a gift, not a loan, and that I wanted nothing in return except to be part of their lives. For most of those 18 years, I believed I had gotten exactly that. Garrett joined my company at 28, after a few years working in commercial lending at a bank downtown. He had a sharp mind for numbers and a confidence that clients responded to. I was proud. I told Diane that night at dinner that I thought we had done something right. She smiled and said, "Don't get ahead of yourself, Walter." That was Diane. She saw people clearly in a way I never quite managed. When she got sick, Garrett was attentive. He drove her to appointments when I had to be at the office. He sat with her in the hospital during the bad weeks. At the funeral, he gave a eulogy that made the entire room weep. I squeezed his arm afterward and told him his mother would have been proud. I meant every word. What I did not see, because I was grieving and because I trusted my son the way you trust something you built with your own hands, was that Garrett had spent the 2 years of Diane's illness positioning himself inside my company in ways that went beyond his official role. He had cultivated relationships with my 2 senior partners. He had inserted himself into vendor contracts. He had begun CCing himself on correspondence that had nothing to do with his department. At the time, I told myself it was initiative. I told myself he was growing into leadership. I told myself a lot of things. Renee had always been cordial to me in the way that a person can be cordial while communicating, through every small choice, that you are peripheral to the world that actually matters. She remembered my birthday because it was in her phone. She invited me to Thanksgiving because not doing so would have required an explanation. When I spoke at dinner, she would listen with an expression of patient endurance, the way you listen to a radio station you didn't choose. I should have paid more attention to that expression. Garrett turned 50 in April. 6 months before, he mentioned the milestone to me over lunch, said he and Renee were thinking about doing something special. I told him I wanted to host it. I said I wanted to rent out the private dining room at Colton's, the restaurant where Diane and I had celebrated every anniversary for 20 years. I said I would handle everything, the room, the catering, the invitations, the band. I said it was my gift to him. He hugged me in the parking lot and said, "Dad, that's incredible, thank you." I spent 4 months organizing that party. I worked with the events coordinator at Colton's twice a week. I made a playlist of songs from Garrett's childhood, his college years, his wedding. I had a photo display, made 60 photographs, one for each decade plus the years ahead, framed and matted. I wrote a speech about what it meant to watch a boy become a man, about Diane and what she would have said, about the future I believed in for our family. I paid the venue deposit in January. I paid the full balance in February. Total cost, $14,000. In March, Renee called me. She said she wanted to take over the coordination from that point forward, that she had some ideas to make the evening more personal, that she hoped I didn't mind. I said, of course not. She asked me to send her the contact at Colton's. I did. She also asked me, gently, whether I would be open to arriving a little later than the other guests, so that the room could be set up the way she envisioned before I came in. She said she wanted to surprise Garrett with the entrance. I thought it was a sweet idea. I told her I would arrive at 8 instead of 7. I should have listened more carefully to the word entrance, because she was not talking about Garrett's entrance. The night of the party, I dressed carefully. I wore the navy blazer Diane had picked out for me on a trip to Chicago the year before she got sick. I drove to Colton's feeling something I hadn't felt in a while, which was anticipation, something close to joy. The events coordinator, a young woman named Paige who had worked with me for 4 months, was standing near the entrance when I arrived. When she saw me coming up the front walk, something moved across her face that I cannot fully describe except to say it was not a welcoming expression. It was the look of a person who has been told to deliver news they wish someone else had to deliver. Before I could reach the door, Renee stepped out from inside. She was wearing a black dress and a careful smile. She walked toward me slowly, the way you walk toward something you need to intercept. "Walter," she said, "I'm so glad you're here." I said, "Well, it's my son's birthday, Renee." She paused. "That's actually what I wanted to talk to you about." What she said next, I will not reconstruct word for word, because I am not sure even now that I heard it with complete accuracy, given that a small portion of my brain had already understood what was happening and was sending emergency signals to the rest of me. But the meaning was clear. The party had evolved, she said, into something more intimate, close friends, immediate family. She thought it might feel more comfortable for everyone if I celebrated with Garrett separately, privately, perhaps the following weekend. She would make a reservation somewhere nice. She was so sorry for the miscommunication. I looked past her shoulder at the door to the restaurant. Through the window, I could see the photo display I had commissioned, my photographs, in frames I had chosen and paid for. On walls I was currently being asked to leave. I looked at Renee. I held her gaze for what I believe was about 4 seconds. "Of course," I said. "Tell Garrett I'll call him in the morning. You enjoy the party." I walked back to my car. I sat there for approximately 3 minutes. Then I drove home. Here is what I did not do. I did not call Garrett's cell phone. I did not go back inside. I did not make a scene that would become a story his friends told later that would allow him to position me as the problem. Here is what I did instead. I called my attorney, a man named Frank Delgado, who had handled my business affairs for 22 years and who I trusted completely. I told him what had happened. There was a silence on his end, and then he said, "Walter, how much do you know about what Garrett has been doing with the Hendricks account?" I said, "Tell me." What Frank told me over the next 40 minutes is the part of this story I am still processing, if I am being honest with you, because it involves a level of premeditation that a father's mind does not easily accommodate. Garrett, over the previous 18 months, had been quietly restructuring his access to several of my firm's largest property management contracts. He had presented himself to 2 of our longtime clients as the operational successor to the company, implying, never stating directly, but clearly implying that I was in the process of stepping back. He had redirected one client's payment routing to an account he and Renee controlled. He had signed a consulting agreement on behalf of my firm with a vendor he had a financial stake in, without disclosure. Frank had discovered the payment routing issue 3 weeks earlier when a reconciliation didn't balance. He had been building documentation. He had been waiting to talk to me in person. "I was going to call you Monday," he said. "I didn't know about tonight." I asked him how much. He told me. The number was significant. I will tell you it was the kind of number that, if you read it in a newspaper article about someone else, you would shake your head and say, "How does someone not notice that?" I noticed because I hadn't been looking. That was my failure. I had trusted what I had built instead of watching it. I told Frank to begin whatever needed to begin. I told him I wanted everything documented and that I wanted it airtight before any conversation happened with Garrett, any conversation at all. Frank said he understood. He told me there was one more thing I should know. I asked him what it was. He said that 6 weeks prior, Garrett had reached out to a business attorney, not Frank, a different firm, about the process for establishing a conservatorship. He had framed it as a question about a family situation. Frank had learned about it indirectly through a professional contact, a conservatorship, the legal process by which a court appoints someone to manage the affairs of a person deemed unable to manage them independently. My son had been making inquiries about how to have me legally declared incapable. I hung up the phone and sat in my kitchen for a long time. The refrigerator hummed. The neighbor's dog barked twice at something in the dark. I looked at the photo on the windowsill of Garrett at maybe 8 years old, sitting on my shoulders at a 4th of July parade, both of us squinting into the sun. I am going to tell you something now that I want you to hear carefully, because it is the part of this story that I think matters most. What I felt in that kitchen was not rage. Rage would have been simpler. What I felt was a grief so specific and so dense that I am not sure the English language has a single word for it. The grief of understanding that someone you loved and trusted and built your life around had looked at you and seen not a father, but a problem to be managed. A resource to be extracted before it became unavailable. I did not sleep well that night, but I slept. Because I had already, some months before, made certain decisions about my company and my estate that Garrett did not know about. Diane had made me promise, in her last coherent weeks, that I would protect what we had built. She had said it with the directness she always had, looking at me from the hospital bed, holding my hand. Don't be sentimental about money, Walter. Be sentimental about people. I had taken her seriously. 11 months prior, working quietly with Frank and a separate estate attorney, I had transferred the majority of my company's assets into a trust. The trust had specific, documented conditions for succession. Garrett was named in it, or had been, before last night in a secondary capacity, with limitations. The primary operational authority sat with an independent board I had established with Frank's guidance. The consulting firm Garrett had tried to redirect was under the trust. The contracts he had repositioned himself on were under the trust. He had been rearranging furniture in a house where he did not hold the deed. The morning after the party, I woke at 5:30 as I always do. I made coffee. I did not call Garrett. At 9 a.m., Frank filed documents with our firm's client notification system, formally clarifying the operational structure of the company and the authority required for any contractual representations. The two clients Garrett had approached received formal letters on company letterhead, signed by me, clarifying that no succession arrangement was in process and that any prior representations to the contrary were unauthorized. At 11 a.m., our firm's compliance officer, a woman named Sandra who had worked with me for 14 years and who I had brought into the situation the night before, met with the vendor whose contract Garrett had signed. The contract was voided on the grounds of undisclosed conflict of interest. At 2 p.m., Frank sent a formal letter to the business attorney Garrett had contacted about conservatorship, putting that attorney on notice that any such proceeding would be contested, and that documentation of the inquiry itself would be made available to the court. Garrett called me at 4:17 that afternoon. I let it go to voicemail. His message was calm, measured, almost businesslike. He said he hoped I understood that the party decision had been Renee's idea and that he had felt caught in the middle. He said he had heard from a few people at the firm and that he thought we should talk in person. He said he loved me. I listened to the message twice. Then I called Melissa in Portland. She already knew something was wrong because she had called me the night before after seeing no photos from the party on anyone's social media. I told her everything. There was a long quiet on the line. Then she said, "Dad, I'm coming to Charlotte." I told her she didn't have to. She said, "I'm coming Thursday." That was Melissa. I did not speak to Garrett for 11 days. On the 12th day, he came to my house. He rang the bell, and I opened the door, and we looked at each other on the porch in the late morning light. He looked tired. He looked, for the first time in a long time, like someone who understood that things had consequences. I invited him in. I made coffee. We sat at the kitchen table where Diane used to do the books. He told me that Renee had pushed for the party decision. I told him that I understood that Renee had pushed, and that he had allowed himself to be pushed, and that those were two different problems. He told me that the business arrangements had begun as genuine attempts to help the firm while I was grieving, and had evolved in ways that he admitted were wrong. I told him that I appreciated the admission, and that it did not change what the documentation showed. He asked me what was going to happen. I told him that the financial irregularities would need to be addressed formally, that Frank was handling the structure of that, and that Garrett would need to work with a separate attorney. I told him that his role at the firm was being restructured, effective immediately, and that he would have a clear path to re-earn a leadership position over time if he chose that, but that it would not be given back. He started to say something, and I put my hand up, not in anger, just to finish. I told him that what had happened between us was something that would take a long time to repair, and that I was willing to try to repair it, and that the trying would have to come from him. I told him that I loved him. I told him that nothing about what had happened changed that. But I told him that love and trust were not the same thing, and that he had broken the second one, and that I needed him to understand the difference before we could move forward. He was quiet for a while, then he nodded. He left. An hour later, I stood at the window and watched his car back out of the driveway, the same driveway I had taught him to ride a bike in, and I felt the particular weight of a moment that is simultaneously an ending and a beginning, and I let myself feel it without looking away from it. Melissa arrived that Thursday as promised. She stayed for 2 weeks. She made dinner every night, and she made me walk in the mornings, and she sat across from me in the evenings, and we talked about her mother, and about the boys, and about what we wanted the future to look like. On the last night before she flew home, she said, "Mom would have handled this better than either of us." I laughed for the first time in what felt like weeks. I want to tell you something, because I think it is the real reason I am telling this story at all. I spent most of my adult life believing that the measure of a man's success was what he built: the company, the house, the reputation, the numbers in the accounts. I chased those things with everything I had, and I was not wrong to value them, but I was wrong about what they meant. I thought they were the foundation. I understand now that they were the ceiling. The foundation was Diane sitting at the kitchen table at midnight, running numbers by lamplight. The foundation was Melissa calling every Sunday, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. The foundation was Frank Delgado, who had known something was wrong and who had been quietly preparing to tell me, who answered the phone at 10:30 on a Saturday night and stayed on until midnight. The foundation was Paige, the events coordinator, who sent me a handwritten note the week after the party, 3 sentences, saying she was sorry for what had happened and that working on the planning had been a privilege. I have been asked, since all of this became known to people close to me, whether I feel betrayed. Yes, I feel betrayed. I have also been asked whether I feel foolish for not seeing it sooner. Yes, I feel that too. But if I am being fully honest with you, what I feel most when I sit in this kitchen in the morning with the coffee and the silence and the photograph on the windowsill is something I was not expecting, something that took me a while to identify. I feel clear. For the first time in 4 years, since Diane died and I lost my bearings and Garrett stepped into that vacuum with all his apparent helpfulness and initiative, I feel like I am standing on ground I actually understand. I know who is in my corner. I know what my company is. I know what my family is, and what it is not. And the grief of that knowledge is real. But grief is something you can work with. Confusion is harder. Garrett and I are in a process. It is slow, and it is uncomfortable, and I do not know where it ends. Renee has not contacted me. I do not expect her to. The legal and financial matters are being resolved in ways I will not detail here, but they are being resolved. What I will tell you is this. The morning after my son's birthday party, when I should have been sleeping off $14,000 and a good speech and 20 photographs of a boy I raised, I was sitting in my kitchen with a bourbon and a phone and a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I did not yell. I did not beg. I did not make a scene in a restaurant parking lot that would have given anyone ammunition. I simply went home, and I made a call. And the next morning, everything was already in motion. If you are a father listening to this, if you have given and found yourself wondering whether the people you gave to even think of you when you are not in the room, I want you to know something. The love you have for your children is not diminished by what they do with it. You don't take it back because they misused it. But you also don't hand over the keys to everything you built to someone who has shown you, in the quietest and most devastating way possible, that they were counting the inventory while you were grieving. Protect what you built, not because it is worth more than your relationships, but because it is the thing your life's work made. And your life's work deserves a witness who will treat it with the respect you gave it. Diane was right. Don't be sentimental about money. Be sentimental about people. Just make sure you're sentimental about the right ones. When life strips away what you thought was solid ground, what remains tells you everything you need to know. Walter lost a party, discovered a betrayal, and sat alone in a quiet kitchen and still found his way back to clarity because he had built something truer than a business. He had Melissa calling every Sunday, Frank answering at midnight, and Diane's voice still guiding him. The people who show up without being asked, those are your real foundation. Hold them close. A small note for you. This story was created and fictionalized by AI, crafted to bring you a moment of meaningful entertainment, while leaving behind something worth keeping a quiet reminder of what and who truly matters.